And that's certainly the case here. So for me, I was discovering, okay, I have a problem. I had no idea, honestly, like I was totally blind. And I started looking for answers. And this is sort of what I guess seeded the work I do now.
There's no logical way to overcome a porn addiction, and I think you've created that blueprint from what I can see. So, dude, like, I'm so super impressed. And like, welcome to the Awaken Man podcast, and an absolute pleasure to be joined by Sathiya Sam today. How are you doing, brother?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me here.
Oh, honestly, I said this to you on your podcast, but this was like, I was looking for speakers who could come and talk to our audience about really potent subjects that are really going to help guys with their personal and professional transformations. And we covered an episode on why men should quit porn. And it was like one of our highest performing episodes. And
No way.
yeah, and I think this is something that guys are awakening to this. You're obviously the expert in this, and guys are awakening to this conversation about that porn isn't just something that guys do. It's like one of the thing, like it's socially acceptable as lads, and a lot of the guys that come to the Awaken Man Project have some level of struggle with pornography or have had. And I was looking for the best speaker, coach, expert on this subject, and all roads point to this guy here who's runs an incredible transformation program where you help men specifically with that problem, like one of the many problems I'm sure you solve for men. So I'd love to hear your story and how this has come to pass, really, Sathiya. I'm like, because I've been following your podcast, been listening to the stuff, and it really resonates. And the way that you do it is phenomenal. So, dude, welcome on the podcast.
Oh, thanks so much, man. Those are really kind words. And you are not the first person I've heard who runs some sort of organization or enterprise that is working with men that has said the top issue or the most response that we've gotten about any of our content, it always has to do with pornography. This is a prevalent issue. I mean, the porn industry itself is estimated to be worth minimum $100 billion. That's conservative. So it makes more money than the NBA, the NFL, and Major League Baseball combined year over year.
Oh.
Those numbers are pre-pandemic, by the way, and their viewership skyrocketed during the pandemic. So it's actually significantly more now. But it increases rates of divorce. I mean, it's causing erectile dysfunction in men under the age of 40 at something to the tune of one out of four, maybe 1 out of 3, depending on the survey. So this is prevalent. And like you said, it started out as kind of a social thing. I still remember when I was in high school, I'll get into my story in a minute, but I remember it was very normal. It was almost weird if you didn't watch it.
Yeah.
And you don't really think anything of it. There's an entertainment aspect to it. Obviously, it's super pleasure inducing. And then you have guys that are, developing into adults in their bodies, but sexually, their development's totally blunted. Emotionally, it's totally blunted. And you have all these really nasty side effects like erectile dysfunction and low relationship satisfaction, low productivity, all that stuff. So
guys listening to this podcast now, I've just hang on a second. Just like they've just turned up the volume and they've gone just repeat that again. Are you saying, Sathiya, that me and my consumption of porn is likely to contribute to me not being able to get wood? Is that what you're saying there? Because guys, listen up, because this is important.
Yeah, what I'm suggesting actually is not only is it contributing, but the stats are pretty indicative that it's probably the cause. So to put it in perspective, in 2001,
wow,
the prevalence of erectile dysfunction among men under the age of 40 was about 5%, or 1 in 20, which is what you would expect, right? Because we know this is like an old man issue. We've all seen the Viagra commercials or whatever it might be. But I mean, think about what's really changed in the last 20 years that could cause it to go from 1 out of 20 to 1 out of 4, 1 out of 3. Well, you could argue that, yeah, stress levels are a little bit higher, sure. I think that's definitely at play. But the most obvious factor is mainstream pornography, because porn, again, well, I know we'll get into all this, but I won't jump too far ahead. But when you watch porn regularly, what it does is it elevates your arousal threshold. And porn is perfectly produced, right? Like this is a production. And so it is causing unnatural levels of stimulation in the body of the man to experience arousal. And as that threshold gets higher and higher, at some point, it crosses a line that is past what you would normally experience when you have the real thing. So guys who are watching porn regularly basically set that threshold so high that when they experience the real thing, it actually doesn't stimulate them enough for them to experience arousal. And that's why you're getting this massive spike in young men experiencing erectile dysfunction.
Oh, wow. If you're listening to this podcast, you won't see me just sat with my mouth open. I didn't know that. I didn't know. I hadn't heard that fact before. And that makes perfect sense because like even like talking openly about my consumption of pornography, it got more and more, it got darker. It kind of got
Yeah.
like, some of the stuff I was watching was like, I would type it in. I'm like, holy shit, have I just typed that in? Like, did I really just type that in? And like, being honest, like guys, you might like laugh and joke. And I'm with my close group of friends. I'd be saying like, guys, have you ever like watched something and you've like, oh my God, what have I just watched? And they were all like, we all joked, like we all laughed, but we laughed at it, but it's really not good, and I think that's what a lot of guys, even I've had conversations, can attest to. Is like, yeah, it just gets darker and darker to the point where, because they're looking for that more and more stimulation. So wow. So guys, if you're not sold on listening to this episode, you are truly, your ears are pricked up.
Well, can I just add something to what you just said?
Yeah, please do.
So there's this concept in the neurobiology behind addiction and sexual science, which is that novelty enhances pleasure. So we all remember that thrill, like the first time some of your first sexual experiences, or the first time you got exposed to pornography, depending on the circumstances. It's kind of that euphoria. And what happens is, this is like classic addiction development. You just return back to the same thing again and again, trying to get the same hit. And what we find out along the way is the only thing that actually produces that same degree of hit or that same kind of feeling is novelty. So that's why you start exploring genres and maybe more obscure content. It's not because you're actually so messed up. It's because your brain is looking for that hit. And so novelty is the only way it can get that. The weird content side of it is actually relatively vanilla. The more extreme stuff is actually when people start buying for sex. It's when they have affairs. There's very extreme cases. Like, I don't know if you guys know who Ted Bundy is. He's a little bit more known in North America, but a notorious serial killer and rapist. And, he was sentenced to life, but basically he did a pretty candid interview at some point in his stint in prison. And he was asked, what do you attribute to the cause of such erratic and extreme behavior that basically no one's ever seen, at least in modern day history? And he basically pointed it all back to pornography. Now, his upbringing was pre-internet, so you can only imagine if somebody like that had the level of access that we have now to internet pornography. Who knows what kind of damage maybe it might have caused. But all is to say is, yeah, there's a really nasty trajectory that everybody says, oh, I'll never become like that guy. Oh, not me. I'm not messed up like those people. But unfortunately, this is just a natural law of science and brain and behavior, which is if you stay on this long enough, it will always lead to more extreme behavior.
Yeah, I can attest to that because I am not, like, to put it plainly, I'm not a super erotic guy in the bedroom. I am, I would say like run of the mill, not super erotic and like super crazy things. But my porn habit definitely got that way before I told you I decided to quit because it just wasn't serving me. It didn't make me feel good, and I could notice some of those things like the arousal that you were talking about, and it's changed my intimacy enormously. But tell me this, because like to get to this point where you are so well educated about pornography and about men's personal performance, like what took you to that place? Like what got you there?
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, obviously nobody just falls into this because it was the thing they wanted to be when they grow up. I had my own experience. So let me give a little bit of context here. I grew up in a pastor's home, and my parents were very involved in church. Obviously, that kind of comes with the territory. They sent us to Christian school. Like, we had a relatively, I wouldn't call it sheltered, but certainly a very safe upbringing. Very little to worry about and just very high church involvement. I got exposed to pornography in the computer lab of my Christian school when I was 11 years old. And this is, pre-smartphone, pre-broadband internet. So it just goes to show you, like, there's no protecting people from this stuff. Parents sometimes will ask me, like, what can I do to make sure my kid doesn't watch porn? It's like, nothing. You can't do anything. It's not a question of if they watch porn. It's a question of when, and obviously there's things you can do to help them. That's another conversation for another day. But for me, my exposure happened early. I was prepubescent at the time. And I mention that because some people's first exposure, it's incredibly exhilarating. Like, you're a little bit like, oh my gosh, what is this? But oh my gosh, what is this? That was not my experience. I was actually pretty disturbed by what I saw. I didn't really get it. And I think sometimes people hear my story and they just think, oh yeah, you probably got exposed and it's instant addiction and you're watching it all the time and it was was so hard to get away from it. No, a little tiny microscopic seed got planted that day. And when I was probably about 12 and a half, 13 years old, that's when I started to kind of go back to the websites. Like I was starting to develop sexually, my curiosity was piqued. And that is when I sort of developed this habitual porn viewership. It wasn't until I got into my uni days that I really was like engrossed in it. And I would say at that point is when I was properly addicted. So planning my days around it, sacrificing commitments to watch it, showing up late to things, it started to really have a toll on my day-to-day life and my decision making. And that was the worst of it. And even still, as like I'm describing it to you, and it's so clear that I was addicted. But if you would have asked me at that time, like, hey, do you think you could ever get rid of this if you want to? I'd say in a heartbeat, no
Yeah.
problem. Whenever I want, classic addict kind of language. So I was like very prototypical in that way. I had an experience in university, and I'll spare most of the details, but basically I was studying the sciences. I was in a very atheistic environment. And like I mentioned, I had a very strong Christian upbringing. So I sort of had reached a fork in the road, and I was really searching spiritually. And in my searching, I mean, speaking with some of the most eloquent and educated people that I had access to, asking a lot of questions and really doing some soul searching, I found my faith for myself, and I decided to become a Christian. And with that decision, because of my upbringing, I knew that there's a certain code of conduct that comes with that territory. Even people who don't know what it's like to be a Christian or have never made that decision, we still all know that there's kind of behaviors associated with being more religious and having a Christian upbringing, or having a Christian lifestyle rather. And I knew that part of this code of conduct meant you don't watch pornography. Like there was a serious disconnect between those two things. And so it was kind of like my time to shine, for the last 10, 12, I don't know, 13 years. I'd been telling myself I can quit this stuff whenever I want. And now the rubber had hit the road, and I could not for the life of me shake pornography. And that was really when I started to just become aware of how bad the situation was. So maybe I'll pause there. I don't know if you want to ask any questions here before I continue, but that's sort of the lay
That's
of the land.
Dude, like I'm just blown away because I just had this belief while you were sharing that I think there's just so many more guys than actually will admit to this. I think that's like a
Yeah.
normal for lots and lots of guys, especially in university dorms. Like if you weren't at university, if you didn't have a girlfriend, you'd probably be watching porn. It's just like
Yeah.
either that or a
Yeah.
box set. And I think it sounds like, because there's so much shame around it. There's so much shame around it. It's like so discreet. It's so like, it's something that you maybe talk openly a little bit with your friends, but you probably haven't got that much emotional intelligence at 20, 19, 18 to talk about something that you're doing that frequently. But
Mm.
no, I don't think at that age you'd have the courage to put your hand up and saying, "Yeah, I'm addicted to porn." But then that's the set of behaviors that's putting in place to cope with things like stress and chronic stress. I think that's what a lot of the things that I did to deal with the stress of university, the stress of relationships, was just
Yep.
watch porn. It was just a lot, but it makes it sound so much more like darker than it was. I just saw it as just this careless act. It's like, yeah, just part of my day, But
Yeah.
yeah. Wow. But I think that speaks to probably so many of our listeners as well. Guys probably nodding their head saying, yeah, I remember life like that, but
Oh,
it's the
100%. Yeah, and like I said, like there's a very strong social aspect to this for men as well, right? Like in locker room talk, you're like I said, it's kind of weird if you don't watch, and there's sort of an understanding that the funny thing to me is that even though there's an understanding that, yeah, sure, most guys are watching it and this is kind of normal, we can't talk about it publicly. And that's very different than any other addiction. If you are an alcoholic, you can drink publicly and, it's fine, right? Or even if it's behavioral, you're addicted to gambling. I mean, all of that happens in a very public way, whereas the nature of porn addiction and really any kind of sex addiction is it's incredibly hidden. And so the shame levels are unbelievably high. There's a correlation there. Anytime something's more hidden, typically more shameful. And that's certainly the case here. So for me, I was discovering, okay, I have a problem. I had no idea, honestly, like I was totally blind. And I started looking for answers. And this is sort of what I guess seeded the work I do now. Because when I went looking for answers, I couldn't find anything of substance. Everyone just said, install an internet filter, try talking to somebody about it. In the more, spiritual context, it was, read your Bible more or pray more. It was kind of, ramp up those disciplines. And those are all good things. I'm not bashing those one bit, but, you and I both coach people, and we know that there's a difference between treating the symptoms of an issue and treating what's actually causing the issue in the first place. And if you want to have any kind of long-term success, whether it's in business, in your finances, finances, in your relationships, or certainly if it's, abstaining from pornography and something toxic in your life, you have to get to the more causal issues. So I spent the first 3 years of recovery not doing that, settling for kind of the gimmicks and the
Yeah.
quick fixes, and basically trying to run this weed over with a lawnmower and then asking, why does this thing keep growing back? When in reality, the root system was driving it all along. And it wasn't until I actually got to more of the root causal elements of the problem, that's when my life really started to turn around, and relatively quick. It was probably about 18 months, 24 months, and I was a totally different person. And that's the nature of getting to the root issues. You probably coach people on a business problem, but then they get breakthrough in their families, or with their girlfriend, because that's the nature of, dealing with something that's more at the root of it. And that happened in my own life. So February 2016, I had my last relapse, and, we haven't looked back since. It was about 2 years of just laying low and enjoying my freedom and waiting. Like I said, I had this idea of, if I can figure this out, I can help so many other guys, because I knew other guys were struggling. But I wanted to wait a couple of years and really be sure. I didn't want to jump the gun. But eventually, I think I'd been clean for about 2.5, almost 3 years. And that's when I kind of got the prompt, or kind of felt the push to finally start doing something. And so that's where Deep Clean came out of. And that's what's kind of my main work today.
Wow, that's super courageous. Like, a lot of what we talk about on Awaken Man is like having impact. Guys, you want to have massive impact on the world. And
Yeah.
just want to acknowledge how much courage that would have taken. And sometimes you're showing up on this podcast, you're super confident. As you listen to Thea speak, you're probably thinking, wow, this guy's super confident. He probably just found this. You made it sound almost easy that you're so I imagine that journey was tough. Like, that must have
Yeah.
been really tough to get to that point.
Man, I mean, I remember, so I've like made this decision. Okay, I'm gonna help guys quit porn, and I'm like, crap. If I do this, I have to probably go on social media, and I still remember the first post, and I'm trying to figure out, like, how do I tell people I'm helping them quit porn without using the word porn, because it was so uncomfortable for me to use it that way. And then I had a coach, and he was like, you got to share your story, and I was like, no, because people are gonna see me differently, and like I had just been dating my wife for a little bit at the time, and I just everything felt so raw and vulnerable. And yeah, I was anything but confident. And that's the one thing that people don't tell you about with addiction in general. And I would say porn addiction in particular, where at least where we've observed it, is it just slowly erodes at your self-confidence. It's the same thing with eating, actually, right? Like, we've all told ourselves, okay, I'm going to quit eating all the sweets. I'm going to stop eating candy. I'm going to do my dessert once a week, and that's it. But what happens is, when you have 2 desserts in a week, is you start to question yourself. Oh, I guess I'm not as strong, or what's the matter with me? Like, it always comes back inward. So when you have somebody like me, who I tried to quit pornography hundreds of times, and I made promises to God, and I have friends who, we would have this thing like, hey, if you have a relapse, like, you have to make a donation to charity, or like we like all kinds of ridiculous, like, nonsense that you set up. Not a lack of effort, but every time you try and then you fail, it kind of just chips away. It just puts a little chink in your identity. And so by the time I was, starting to get free, I was finding my confidence back. But even just stepping out to help people, it was terrifying. But the cool thing, and the other side of it, is when you agree to take risks in life, you will always be rewarded one way or another. Sometimes it's the risk itself that's rewarding. It's just, hey, you stepped out and you did it, well done. We tell people that, the outcome is the bonus. Like, that we can't always control the outcome, but as long as you take risk, you'll always push things forward. And, I launched a book last year that got picked up by our national, like our BBC equivalent here. And, we've been, we've got our message in front of hundreds of thousands of people now, who all know I'm a porn addict and struggled for 15 years. And it's taken time. It's taken time to get there, but that's sort of the fun part about going through the struggles of life, is one day you can not only talk about them, but hopefully inspire some courage and some hope in other people as well.
Yeah, I think that even when we did the so we did the, like, I can share that as a kindred sort of story, is that I remember starting the Awaken Man project with Yassine, and Yassine's like, my business partner, and Pete as well. And I remember saying to Yassine, he's like, we're going to start this thing called the Awaken Man project. And I'm like, dude, I am so fucking unawakened. I have got some serious, I said this in front of guys. I've got a terrible relationship with pornography. My relationship isn't where I want it to be. I'm not behaving the way I want to. My business isn't in the place. And he goes, that's exactly why you need to do it.
Wow.
And that, like, the part of that for me was like, right, okay. And I personally have found that, like, since we did the episode, like, why guys need to quit porn, it's almost like no one can hurt me with that now. It's out in the open. It's Like I have no shame around it. I'd rather have a conversation about it. And I've had guys that come up to me and say, by the way, I've listened to the episode about porn. That's exactly I am or was.
Yep.
And actually and I love this saying is like your problems are like vampires, they disappear in the light. And I think that
Wow.
even just like admitting to somebody else or sharing publicly like I did on a podcast, it does feel that the shame just, and Brené Brown talks about that, is that shame, if you put shame in a petri dish and you put words and an exposure to it, it just disappears. And for me, that was a big part of my healing. I wish I said to Sathiya, I wish I'd have found you before, like a year ago, but because I really did struggle, because I went through that same thing of like promising myself, and then, oh, do you know what? Just this one time won't hurt. Oh, just this one
Yep.
time. And I got it down to just this one thing where I was like, okay, if I'm in a hotel room on my own, away from Poppy, it's legit. It's okay because I'm doing it because I've got no other access to sexual stimulation. And then it just felt like this is ridiculous. I'm making these bargains with my viewership. And I was just like, do you know what? I'm just going to quit. And a year ago I quit, and it was just such a big step.
Good for
And
you.
yeah, man, it was like, but I can see that in like, and what I loved about, I'm listening to your podcast, is that you take it way beyond developing just past the addiction. You grow the man as well, don't you? Like you actually, because what I'm gathering just from listening to your stuff is that they come to you with the issue of having an addiction to pornography, but then you help them perform as an individual. So I'm
Yeah.
gathering that it's not just an addiction program, it's a performance program that you created to help guys overcome their addiction. So could you speak more to that, like how you get guys to overcome the addiction that they have?
Yeah, for sure. I really like the way you put that. I would say I'm not as passionate about helping men quit porn as I am about helping men achieve their potential. And to me, porn is just, or sexual misbehavior, if we want to broaden this a little bit, it's just the barrier. It's the thing that's stopping people from getting to their dreams, getting to their potential, their fulfillment. And that's really what we're after. Even the podcast is called Unleash the Man Within. It's that idea of like, you have it all there, but there's just something that's holding it back. And usually it is pornography or something else. So our whole process is very, very simple. We believe in addressing the roots of the issue, and we will do whatever it takes to get there. People typically then will ask, well, what does that mean? What are root issues, or what does that look like? And I would tell you that root issues typically fall into one of three categories. The first is what we call self-awareness, and each of these categories has a mantra with it. So our mantra for self-awareness is, if you are not aware, it cannot be repaired. And the idea is that there's a lot going on within someone's mind, heart, and life that is driving their behavior. And the reason that we settle for gimmicky, curb the behavior, just modify it at all cost kind of solutions is because we are not aware of the inner thoughts, beliefs, paradigms, emotions, feelings, and perceptions that are driving the behavior in the first place. So a lack of self-awareness is a really big one, especially for a lot of guys, because we're not taught these skills typically. Second category is transformation of the heart. And this would be working through trauma, wounds from the past, bitterness, resentment, unforgiveness. This is kind of the deeper work that's not always comfortable for guys to do, but I'm telling you, if especially for those that are high performers, business owners, people that are working their way up the ladder a little bit, which I know a lot of your audience is, this is typically where we see the most breakthrough, because it's crazy if you have trauma, not even like major, like catastrophic stuff. Like I said, I had pretty good upbringing. I still had trauma I needed to work through. When you have those things in your life and you can finally talk about it, process it, reach a resolution, like, I mean, we are talking about systemic change in the individual that
Wow.
affects basically every area of their life. It's fascinating. And the mantra for this category is, he who is most vulnerable heals the quickest. So it's exactly what you were just talking about a minute ago, Ben. It's that whole like awakened man, right? Like
Yeah.
why the heck would we start something like this when I don't feel awakened at all? Well, your vulnerability actually gave you a launching pad into your healing and to the person you become today, where I know for a fact you are an awakened man living a very awakened lifestyle. Like, you're modeling something now for your audience, and your vulnerability was I mean, again, I don't know the full story, but your vulnerability was obviously part of that. And we witnessed that in our program as well. Third category is the one that's probably the most easy for guys to understand, and that is identity. And a lot of the guys that come to us have very faulty belief systems. And here's the reality: you cannot outbehave your beliefs. So if you have faulty behavior that you can't escape, no matter how hard you try, there is a belief system underneath that needs to be addressed. So that's kind of where what we focus on with this third pillar and the third category. The mantra here is I would rather be 100% myself and rejected than 80% myself and accepted. And what we're trying to
Wow.
do is foster radical courage and authenticity in the man to embrace his calling, to embrace his gifting, his unique skill set, his persona, everything that makes him who he is, embracing that without apology. And it takes time to get here, but you actually commented on this earlier. You can see the confidence, right? You can see sort of the strength that I possess, and a huge part of that is my faith. But the other part of it would be this journey that I've been on, working through the three different categories, and that's what this system was derived from. It was more or less my experience. I obviously combing a lot of research, following some clinicians and that kind of thing and whatnot. But all of it really led to, man, these are the three things that really seem to categorize most of the issues guys are going through. I know I'm
Oh,
talking for a
wow.
long time here, but let me just add one last thing, and then I'll send it back to you. What adds gasoline to this fire is a little thing called community. So you can do all of this alone, and you will get some results for sure, because the system is just too good for it to not breed some sort of fruit in your life. But if you really want to experience freedom and not just sobriety, and there is a difference, if you really want genuine freedom and you want to be the person that you were made to be, and you want to reach your potential and make a difference in this world, you will need to do this in the context of community. Community is what not only amplifies the results in the process, it's what sustains them after you've done the deeper work in these three categories. And so we have witnessed this firsthand. There's tons of research that would suggest this as well, but it's very clear if you really want to get the most out of your efforts, you need to do this with other guys who are on the same journey as you.
Oh, wow. Dude, you don't need to apologize for talking. I was like making notes furiously here because there's just like so much I can learn. Because I love that idea with the community that if you want to make a behavior, if you want to like change a behavior, go and join a community where that behavior is the norm. And like that was, I
Yeah,
used to say that
right.
all the time in the gym. So I used to own a gym, right? And I was like, if you want to get fit, go to a place where the desired behavior that you have is the normal behavior. So like it was normal for our clients to come train every day. So if I want to learn to train every day, I go to the gym. So it's like, it's just like listening to you there. You've gone a mile deep with this. Like this is like a real, it's like the one that really stumped me. I thought, wow, this is like how it would be so much different to so many other programs is like the transformation of the heart. I'm curious because is it that so many guys they don't know how to forgive, they're angry, they are reacting to stories from their past, patterns from their
Yeah.
past, and that's why they keep perpetuating the habit, because it's like, I'm already angry, I'm already bitter, someone does something, I get super anxious or super angry. The only way I know how to relieve tension or head-based thinking is to go and jerk off because it removes the tension. Like Robert Gestis Masters talk about this. It's like a lot of guys are so heady, they so up in their thoughts that a sexual release is the only way they can get dropped down into their body. And I remember hearing him say that and I was like, that makes so much sense. Like that does, because like, you know, we even talk about it on Awaken Man. It's like there's a load of guys sat there talking and thinking and not feeling.
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of guys really struggle with, is to articulate their emotions. They don't have the words, they don't have the language to do it. So as part of what you do there is to help guys express.
Oh, yeah, 100%. So I'll share a little bit of my own story. One of my discoveries along the way when I was kind of getting more into the root issues was that there was some discord in my relationship with my mom that was contributing to my porn consumption. Now, if you were to do a search of, or if you were to look at some of the stats around the most common keywords that are typed into the search engine of Pornhub and any porn website, in the top 5 is always two. Two always show up. One is stepmom and the other is MILF content. It's always there in the top 5. And I'll explain to you exactly why this is using my own story. So my mom, sweetest woman you'll ever meet, wouldn't hurt a fly, incredibly kind, very loving woman. The way that she expressed love for me as a child was by doing things. So making the meals, cleaning up, you know, the more kind of acts of service. I don't know how familiar you are with the love language framework, but
Yeah.
the acts of service stuff. Me personally, I am a words of affirmation guy and I'm a quality time person. And those are just not, they were not built into our lifestyle growing up. So I discovered that I had actually grown up with a kind of a lingering sense of neglect from my mom. Not that she intentionally neglected me, but I didn't get love in the way that I think would have really made me feel the most loved by her. So as a teenager, that was chasing girls and maybe starting to watch some pornography. But those are normal behaviors as a teenager, right? Especially like the chasing girls part. We won't normalize pornography, but certainly like it's normal to take an interest in girls. It's just that I didn't realize that what was actually driving this was some of the dysfunction in my relationship with my mom. So by the time I'm an adult, well, I'm no longer just watching porn to take the edge off or whatever else. I'm actually acting from this place of trauma because I have unmet needs that haven't been met since I was a little kid. And the way that I'm satisfying that is going to porn where I get accepted. I feel this sense of kind of what we would call fast food intimacy, temporarily satisfies the cravings, but leaves you hungrier afterwards. All of my porn consumption was really driven by some of this, the unmet emotional needs. And I would even maybe categorize that as trauma as a little boy. So my process of forgiveness was number one, just being able to articulate what I just told you. That took months. It took months to get to that place. You know what I mean? Like this is like
Yeah.
it was not something I did naturally. And I actually like between growing up in church culture and my parents are both Indian immigrants. They immigrated to Canada back in the 70s and 80s. So between all of those facets, emotions were not discussed. You know,
Yeah.
that was messy. It was uncomfortable. It was like put those things away at all costs. And so for me, I learned to cope that way. And I had to basically unlearn it and discover how to dig into my emotions. And that was the process. But on the other side of it, being able to articulate it and say, okay, this is the pain that was caused, and this is how I felt about it. This is the effect it had on me. Once you can actually articulate those things, then the process of something like forgiveness and kind of letting those things go, it's much easier. And it's much more impactful as well. The deeper you can go on that front end, the more impactful it is on the back end. So those things were intricately connected. And the thing that actually helped me, if guys are wondering, so how did you actually develop that skill of articulating emotions and kind of diving in a bit more? Nothing contributed to this more than journaling. Journaling was the most helpful thing in the world. And we teach a very basic journaling methodology. It's pretty much 5 minutes of expression and 5 minutes of reflection. Expression is where you're asking yourself two questions. What am I thinking about and how am I feeling about it? And there's lots of different, there's other angles you can come at, but you're basically just writing, you're articulating. And then reflection is you put the pen down and you let your brain process a bit. This is where I believe God speaks, you know, from a faith perspective. And this is where some of our guys have their biggest breakthroughs. So I swear by journaling, it's been super helpful in a lot of different ways, but especially for articulating emotions.
Yeah, because I referenced him earlier in the podcast, a guy called Robert Augustus Masters. He's wrote the book To Be a Man. It's a great book. We've done a lot of work with him on Awaken Man. His work really inspired me. We're actually going to get him on the podcast. He did a session with the guys, right? So we were doing this session and, you know, we were doing hot seat therapy because he's a therapist. And he was like, you know, and he said like, he was asking one of the guys about his relationship with porn. He said, I'm addicted to porn. And he said, well, if you were to take the eroticism out of what you're watching, what are you watching? And he said, you know, what you type in. And this guy never thought about it like that. He's taking what Robert said on in the session is, guys, what you write into the porn search bar says more about your unmet needs and your unresolved trauma than it does about your sexual blueprint.
Yes.
And I was like,
Yes.
holy shit, I've never thought about it like that. And I was like, oh crap, what does that say about me? And I was like, whoa. But it was like, oh my God, that means a lot. And I think, guys, if you're listening to this, you're probably either giggling or literally just like, oh my gosh, what have I written into the search bar? But it's so true. And I think that no one, like, guys are not, and I think this is something that I love what you're doing, because there is no, like, when you are an alcoholic, you've got a blueprint of like, go to AA, go to a rehab. There's really, really well signposted ways to go and solve the problem. Whereas there's no logical way to overcome a porn addiction. And I think you've created that blueprint from what I can see. So dude, like, you know, I'm so super impressed. And like, what I'm curious about is the success that it's brought to both yourself. Obviously, you know, we talked about the confidence earlier, but like, what's changed in your life as, like, you know, because you fly the flag, you're in so in integrity with what you teach. What's changed in your life as a result of you going through this process, and what do you see happening, guys, that you work with life?
Yeah, so I'll start with my own experience. There's two things in particular that have really been changed because of this journey. And the second one is my favorite, but I'll lead with the first just because I think it's worth mentioning. I always had this dream that if I could figure out how to get free, that I could help other guys. And that was actually one of my prayers was, God, if you can help me figure this out, I will use my story to help others. And we probably get anywhere from 5 to 10 emails a week of people that are saying, hey, I read your book. The book comes with a free workbook. I'm doing the workbook right now. It's changing my life. Listen to the podcast. Our podcast just crossed 300,000 downloads.
Wow. Well done, man.
Instagram, like we're getting, thank you. We're getting tons of traction on Instagram. Went from like 5 to 60,000 followers in the last 6-7 months. We are literally impacting thousands of people every day now. And all of it is because of what was really the ugliest, darkest part of my life. And that is like, to me, like obviously like a testimony of God's goodness. But again, for even people who maybe aren't necessarily faith-based, it's just a testament of how your mess can become something that's incredibly powerful to the world. And that gives me a sense of purpose. Like I love Mondays. I wake up in the morning excited, to do my work. Like it's really given me a sense of fulfillment. I had a second prayer when I was going through recovery, and I had prayed that whoever my future wife would be, that I wouldn't meet her until I could figure this out. And that was inspired by a mentor. At one point, I remember saying this to him because I was not particularly like sexually active in my single days. I had, a couple of relationships here and there, but I was not like very promiscuous. And I remember saying to a mentor, man, I can't wait until I'm married one day, and then I won't have to worry about this porn thing because I'll be having sex all the time. And he almost reached across the table and smacked me and was like, bro, that is not how it works. Like if it is a problem now, it will be a bigger problem later. And it just kind of hit me. I had no idea. But I really took it seriously. So I prayed that prayer, whoever my future wife is, whoever she might be, keep her away from me until I'm ready, until I have this figured out. And I mentioned February 2016, I had my last relapse. November 2016 is when I met Shaloma, who's now my wife of 3.5 years at the time of this recording. And we're getting ready to have our first baby in October.
Yeah, I saw, dude. Congratulations. You're becoming a dad. And you're getting a boy.
Man.
You're having a boy as well.
Yeah, we're having a boy.
Yeah.
We're having a boy. So
yeah, I saw the announcement and I was like, I had a pang of jealousy because I said this to Pete. I was like, I got two girls and I wanted to, me and Poppy were both quite open. We wanted a boy and a girl. But I was like, oh, dude, but no, congratulations, man. It looked like ecstatic, the announcement. So yeah, well done,
thanks, man. Thanks. Yeah. No, we're super excited. And I feel like with every stage of life that I enter or every kind of milestone moment, I just look back and think, man, if I wouldn't, it's not just if I wouldn't have quit porn. That's obvious. Obviously, if I wouldn't have quit porn, I don't know what the health of my marriage would be. I don't know how prepared I would feel for fatherhood and raising a boy in this world and all that stuff. But it's actually the character development and it's the skill formation that takes place in the process of recovery that has made me a better person now to start a business and start a podcast and grow our brand and reach more people and have a healthy marriage. Those skills are what actually have played into it so much. We just finished working. Well, actually, I shouldn't say we just finished. This was probably about 6 or 7 months ago. We worked with a guy who had been addicted to porn for 50 years, wow. 50 years, 70 years old. It was magazine, so maybe he wasn't addicted the whole time, but eventually it became an addiction. In his words were, I would cheat on my wife every opportunity that I got. So this guy we're just talking piles and piles of affairs. And basically he got caught and he turned to us. He needed help. He was fighting for his marriage. He was fighting for his family, and he was fighting for, the last leg of his life. He did not want it to end with a big smolder on it. And so his big thing was vulnerability. He didn't, that whole healing of the heart piece we were talking about, he didn't really get it, and again, generationally, like you can kind of understand, like if the guy's 70 years old, like that generation they don't comprehend that as much, but he went both feet in. And so he really owned it. He started sharing more openly with his wife, and not just openly about like, here's all the stuff I did. It wasn't just like that kind of stuff, but it was like, man, he was articulating his emotions. Here's some of the stuff I was feeling today. I saw somebody attractive at the mall. I felt super tempted to come home and watch pornography. I didn't, but he's just trying to like have this really high degree of transparency in the relationship. And his wife, by the time he's done working with us, his wife is like, what have you done with my husband? I don't recognize him. But so much so that he was actually starting to share about his own journey with like his mother-in-law and people in the church community. And like he was starting to gain that confidence back. And like you said, I love what you said earlier, that sense of just breaking out of the shame, like not ashamed to talk about what he had been through. And this is the kind of stuff that we see. We've seen people start businesses. We've seen people, we finished working. I'll share one more story here. I don't want this to go too long, but we worked with a professional basketball player. He had just finished his career and he was kind of transitioning into something different. different. And he had met the girl of his dreams, super excited, ready to finally get married. And she said, by the way, if we're going to get married, I just want you to know that I consider porn to be cheating. So if you want to marry me, you can't be watching pornography. And he was like, oh, okay, good to know. Let me get back to you. I have a bit of work to do. And so he came to us, and his big thing, again, if I could use the three pillars, the self-awareness, healing of the heart, and identity, his big thing was actually the self-awareness. So he really, again, like as an athlete, you build really high level of awareness of certain things, but more on the physical performance side of it. On the more emotional side of it, to, relating with other people and all that, not so much. And so that was his big thing. The other big thing was some belief systems. Like he was really driven by a sense of not being good enough and feeling like he had to prove to the world that he was. So those two things were kind of where we focused. Again, did some, the communal aspect, obviously very important, pretty in-depth coaching with him. And the cool thing is by the end of his time with us, he was engaged to Whitney, his fiance. Patrick is his name. So Patrick was engaged to Whitney, and they were set to get married. I think it was about 6 weeks after he had finished the program.
Oh,
The week
wow,
he was
man.
supposed to get married, I got a message from him, and it was very short. It was kind of unusual for Patrick. Hey, so just wanted to give you an update, and there was a link to a news article. Well, the weekend before, he had rolled his car. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and the car flipped multiple times, and he found out that he was paralyzed from the waist down. Just
Oh,
just
no.
like that. Like we're talking 10 days before he's supposed to get married, kind of thing. And the cool thing about it, the silver lining is, number one, there is a chance he can get his feeling back if his rehab goes basically perfect for the next 2 years. And he's in the middle of that right now. But the second thing is, because he didn't just try to white knuckle his way through recovery, because he didn't just slap an internet filter, but he actually built skills for processing emotion, for articulating his inner life, being able to have meaningful dialogue and relate with other people in a way that's actually impactful. And because he had started working on his belief system, he had a really solid foundation to hurdle the mental blocks that came with becoming paralyzed from the waist down. And it's not a perfect story, it's his story's not finished and it's been challenging, but it's that skill set, it's that character development. That's what's so impactful about the recovery journey, that leads you not just to a life of freedom from pornography, but hopefully a life of better relationships, fulfilling your calling in life, and unshakable confidence. And some of these
Wow.
guys are really good examples of that.
Yeah, and I got that from listening to your podcast. I really did get that sense of you're just building good, strong men with character that can overcome the obstacles instead of just like you said before. I love that analogy of the lawnmower and the weed. It's like, okay, it's just just do some stuff. And oh, dude, yeah, I love that story. And I think I just want to share with the guys that are listening. If you've been compelled to get in touch with Sathiya about anything that we've discussed on this podcast, get in touch with me and I'll signpost you to the best place. But what would be the best way for them to begin that journey, to get in touch, to find out more about how they can overcome some of the obstacles that you've talked about in today's conversation?
Yeah, our podcast is definitely the best place. It's called Unleash the Man Within, and we're a daily podcast Monday to Friday, so tons of content in there. And if maybe there's something we didn't address today, but people are curious, you can do a search through 550 plus episodes and probably find some at some point in time we've covered it. That would be a great place to start. And through that, you can find out about the book. The book's called The Last Relapse, our coaching programs, all that's on the podcast. But that really is the best place for people to start and kind of get the lay of the land.
Yeah, we'll put all that stuff in the show notes as well. Like if you're listening on Spotify or the Apple Podcast, I'm sure there's an easy access to the show notes. Click on the link and it'll take you straight over to that stuff. Because honestly, I really do genuinely believe that there's not enough support for guys who are trying to overcome this issue. And
Mm-hmm.
there's nobody out there that is as qualified, has got the results, the track record as Sathiya. So I endorse what you're doing. I've consumed quite a lot of your podcast as well. So
Oh, cool,
grateful
man.
for, yeah, and it's awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming and having this conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I've really genuinely had just so many insights, and I'm grateful for the work you do. And yeah, grateful for you, man.
Oh, thanks for having me, bro. And honestly, just honored to be a part of what you're doing. You got a good thing here, man.
Thank you, buddy.